Hello, good afternoon, and welcome. Welcome to the F50 SVE Demo AgTech and FoodTech track. My name is Roger Royce. I'm your moderator of this panel. I'm a partner with the international law firm of Haynes and Boones, resident in Palo Alto, California. I also run the firm's AgTech practice. So I want to welcome you here today. We've got a very international panel to talk about investment in AgTech. We have people from all over the world joining us today, so it'll be a really interesting, diverse panel with lots of different perspectives. Mary Shelman from Shelman Group in Boston. She's a venture partner with Radicle Growth. Aiden Connolly is with AgriTech Capital. He's from North Carolina today. Lyall from Big Idea Ventures in Singapore, New York City, and Lessa Soulodre from R3I Ventures in Singapore. Thank you. Welcome, panel. Thanks for being here. And just a word of housekeeping, we're going to have our AgTech and FoodTech track panel. Immediately following this panel, we're going to go right into the startup demos. So stick around for that. And you can see some of the demo companies. I promise you we got some good companies here. I handpicked a lot of them, so I know you're going to like them. So to start off, I wonder if I could get our panelists maybe just give us a short introduction, tell us about who you are and how you come to the space of AgTech and FoodTech investing. And I think I'm going to start with Mary, since you're the closest to me on my Zoom screen.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks for having me. I came here after I guess I would say I was born into this space of AgTech back before AgTech wasn't cool. My dad was a farm equipment dealer in Kentucky, actually worked on bringing in no-till farming back in the 1960s. So a long time, I've had a career path, didn't start out here, engineer, went and spent some time also doing AgTech before AgTech was cool as chairman of a board of a company called Rice Tech, which was doing new rice genetics and marketing, all conventional breeding. Spent some time at Harvard Business School. In the last 4 years, I've been working with investors and corporate startups and governments around the world. So I wear a number of different hats, but I must say working with the startup community, the AgTech community is probably one of my favorites.
Okay, thanks very much, Mary. While we're waiting for Aiden to come back online, Abby, could you tell us a little bit about Big Idea Ventures?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. So Big Idea Ventures is a fund that's historically been focused on very early stage innovations in alt protein. So plant-based and cell-based alternatives to meat, dairy, and seafood and the corresponding ingredients. I came on board the team as program director midway through last year. I had been an accelerator operator and a venture capitalist previously at an industry agnostic fund, and really enjoyed the space and the work that I was doing, but wanted to use it to make a bigger impact on causes that I cared about, like human health, global climate change, and animal welfare. So joining the BIV team was the perfect way for me to marry what I was already doing professionally with the causes that I was personally passionate about. And then as of this week, I'm actually in the process of transitioning out of my accelerator management role into a new later stage initiative that we're starting at BIV, which focuses on later stage deals across a wide variety of climate positive agriculture and food tech, including waste reduction, water, soil health, and a variety of other sectors that we're now focused on. So excited to hear about what everyone else is working on and to see all the startups pitch.
Okay, great. Thank you, Abby. Lessa, to you.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Lessa Soulodre and I'm the general partner of R3I Ventures. We're a cross-border deep tech and health tech adventure firm here in Singapore. We're actively involved across all areas of deep tech, everything from sustainable growth solutions to ag tech, to water scarcity solutions, to climate resilience solutions. And predominantly, we spend the bulk of our time working with the PFAN network, which is an initiative backed by the UNIDO, helping to grow, support, and scale early stage ventures into Southeast Asia, which, as you know, particularly with climate change, is where some of the biggest impact can be made. I'm a responsible investor, so I come from developing the ESG analytics and aggressive accounting scores, etc., that you see in the markets today. And I come to the AgTech space specifically with a passion in Southeast Asia, working inside of Unilever Foundry in their impact space, looking to bring our startup ecosystem across some of the biggest challenges that they have in the region. So great to be with you all today, and I'm really excited to see the startups that you have.
Well, thank you for being here. While we're waiting for Aiden to come back online, I think, Lisa, if you don't mind, I might stick with you on this. We have two panelists here, Lisa and Abby from Singapore, and I think it's worth talking about what's going on in Asia and Southeast Asia in AgTech and FoodTech in particular. I've noticed a tremendous amount of activity just in recent years. A lot of venture funds have popped up, focused around ag and FoodTech in that area. Our incubator program, we did a month in China in 2008, end of 2017, and I came to see firsthand just how big this is, how big it is, and how important it is to China. 300 different scientific facilities focused on agriculture technology. So maybe Lisa or Abby or both of you can comment on what the state of play in the market in Asia is right now.
Maybe Abby, you can talk specifically about your alt protein business, because I think that's really a very significant space here now.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about it. So I'm actually US based. I'm in New York, and I run our accelerator operations on the New York side and kind of handle deals on the US end. But as far as our firm as a whole, the Singaporean government has been such a massive supporter for us. Temasek Holdings was one of our anchor LPs. We've gotten a wide variety of grants through ESG and other initiatives that the Singaporean government has. They're really a government that's very forward thinking and really looking at how do we make food security and climate security a number one issue, for us, and basically how do we make sure that we're able to feed ourselves moving forward. They're a small country without a lot of land mass, so they're really needing to think a lot and get creative with ways that they can use technology to make sure that they're ensuring food security for all of their people. So I really like seeing the way that the Singaporean government's been looking at those sorts of things, and that they've been interested in backing, early young venture firms like ours and startups like the startups that we work with. The fact that a government is able to and willing to take a risk in that area is something that I think is really inspiring, and something that I think more governments across the globe, and particularly in the West, should be emulating.
Yeah, food security is a real issue when you get over to that part of the world. Here in the United States, it's an interesting statistic that establishes a market, but in other parts of the world, it's a serious, life or death sort of issue, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've got so much land here that we're all just spoiled here in the United States.
But we also have some of the biggest challenges in this region, right? The deforestation of Malaysia and Indonesia in particular in exchange for palm oil has a huge impact on the world, and our ability to change that at the heart simply through transformation of processes, through digital transformation, to realign incentives across the value chain to stop some of the downside risk that we've had for so long, I think, is imperative. And while food security is a big focus for Singapore, food safety is a huge issue across the region. And Rubens, I think you saw earlier today, is playing a massive role in that. They are an initiative out of Australia, out of the state of Victoria, backed by the Victorian government. We have a comprehensive strategic partnership between Singapore and Australia. And these guys in particular are looking at provenance and quality in that fresh fruit supply chain. When we had COVID hit, obviously getting access to enough fresh fruit and vegetables was a key priority for the country. And now they're doing that not only between Australia and Singapore, but also Australia and China, obviously feeding a large population in the region. So I think we have a huge opportunity to make climate change specific initiatives here that can really have a major impact on the world. And, I'm proud to be a part of the PFAN network playing a role in that.
Yeah, so on that, I don't know if you saw this, but last week on the 9th, October 9th, McKinsey put out another report. They've been doing about one a month on innovation in agriculture. And this one had to do specifically with connected farms, with broadband access and the new broadband technologies that are coming online. And their estimates are that extra connectivity is going to add another $500 billion of production by 2030 to the global agricultural system. That's huge. In fact, they say just autonomous tractors alone, connectivity will add another $50 billion of production. So it kind of tells us that there's an opportunity for data, sensors, robotics, anything connected. Mary, out in Boston, I mean, I think maybe we're talking your language when we talk about those sorts of issues. Are those the kinds of things that you're seeing, that you're investing in and you're excited about?
Well, I think that, whether it's the digitization of farming or the whole connectivity piece of it, it will unlock tremendous amounts of value. The challenges, though, that we found during COVID is that we don't have broadband access every place we need it. So I'm from Kentucky originally. I've done a lot of work in the state recently thinking about ag tech, and now connectivity is so important. Is we need it not just for farming, but we need it for work, we need it for health, we need it for education. So tremendous opportunities there, and hopefully this is a big time to bring it in. I think the challenge I always have with these issues, though, is there's there's so much tech out there. There's almost too much tech out there today, and there's a lot of investment dollars out there today, but how do you actually bring it into the system? And the challenge typically that we hear is, the farmers are so slow to adopt. And so therefore the farmer must be wrong as opposed to the tech is wrong. So those are the kind of things that I've been thinking about recently. What is it that actually is the roadblock? And is it in terms of farmer attitudes, or is it about the tech itself, and the tech isn't really quite ready for prime time, and so it's not unlocking the value that that it could have.
Yeah. Welcome back, Aiden. Maybe you could catch up with us a little here and tell us who you are and what your fund does, and then I'm going to ask you to follow up on what Mary was just talking about.
I love following up on Mary, so I'll give it a go. My name is Aiden Connolly. I'm the CEO of a company called Cainthus. We do recognition systems using cameras for cows. So we watch cows and we tell you how they're behaving and how they're happy and healthy. And we actually have some impact in terms of sustainability, which is pretty interesting. I also work as AgriTech Capital's president. We've invested in about 4 startups so far, advised with Fortune 50 food companies, worked with some agribusiness companies, and I've had the pleasure of being on other panels with Mary. So that's also having known her previously from Harvard. So happy to join belatedly. Thanks for inviting me.
So I got to believe connected cows will certainly benefit from rural broadband access that we're all hoping to get, and some of the advances in technology. Are you seeing that now? And has that created some new opportunities, new markets, new industries?
Yeah, it's very, very, very challenging to try to introduce technology onto the farm when you can't get connectivity. And I know that Beth Ford of Land O'Lakes is president. She's been very passionate about going on to various Wall Street Journal, etc. forums and talking about the fact we can't bring farmers forward, large, small, medium, unless we have access to that. Our goal in terms of Cainthus has been to look at the cows, see how much time they get to rest, how much time they get to eat, and those are very, very critical. And we bring tremendous insights, things that you really haven't been able to do since we domesticated the cow 8,500 years ago, domesticated the auroch, which was the predecessor to the cow. We've never had that level of information accessible, but it's all lost unless we get connectivity. So definitely very, very, very critical.
Okay. Lisa, I want to come back to you. You said something, speaking of new technologies, you said something really interesting. You mentioned provenance. And about 2 years ago, of course, we saw a blockchain revolution, according to Alex Tapscott anyway. And we saw that in agriculture and supply chain as well. At least I saw the start of it. Of course, now we call it distributed ledger technology. But can you maybe give us an update on where that is and what's happened? And the reason I ask is one of the things this COVID has showed us is just how fragile our supply chain is and how interconnected it is. And if something goes wrong in one little link in a chain, it just messes up the whole chain. Hopefully blockchain can help that.
Yeah, look, it's fair to say that the work that we're doing with APAC Provenance is obviously centrally tied to blockchain underpinning food security and the concept of agility in supply chain. Look, I live in an ecosystem that hangs out with the guys from Ocean Protocol, right? Who you've probably heard of those guys. We've got a blockchain exchange that lives within our ecosystem, and our ecosystem is built on the back of Unilever's supply chain. So everyone in the agricultural supply chain lives within our ecosystem, and it's really interesting. There's been so many claims of what blockchain could deliver, but because it hasn't been adopted en masse, we've just now got a really hyper fragmented ecosystem of bit providers. And the whole purpose is to get end-to-end transparency in a complex global supply chain system for step change in agricultural supply chain logistics. And I don't think we're quite there yet. I think there's been a lot of claims, there's been a lot of aspirations, but also that technology is not yet hardened, right? It's still tech readiness level 5, dirty demo in a lab or just coming out of the lab. And so I think there's been a lot of hype, especially on the back of the ICO scene, which was really ripe here in Asia. And now, we're seeing blockchain by itself as being the demanded technology, as opposed to the tokenization and everything that went with it, because it wasn't just about the blockchain, right? It was about the transformation of the business model in order to deliver value back to the smallholders. And every little AgTech player in this region was sitting there offering tokenization as a new form of wealth for farmers. And I really never saw the value of that. So, I think we've suffered in this hype around blockchain. The blockchain has started to get a bad name on the back of that tokenization piece that has largely failed.
Any other panelists have a comment on blockchain or distributed ledger?
I think blockchain is an incredibly exciting technology and probably has more potential in the food industry because we have had more problems. We have not necessarily had good actors within the food chain for a variety of reasons. And I think creating that transparency is absolutely critical. But we also need to continue to make sure we're putting good information into it, because clearly the fact that the information's been confirmed and demonstrates that it has been come from a certain person doesn't necessarily mean that bad things haven't happened. But in general, blockchain has immense potential for food.
Just to build on what Aiden said, I agree, tremendous potential there. But to me, blockchain's an enabling technology in terms of new business models. In and of itself, the question is, what value does it actually create? And I think that's one of the challenges when you have this big hype around it, as Lisa was talking about. What problem is it actually solving? Transparency, but who's that valuable to, and are they willing to put money into the system that might make it back to that smallholder farmer? The limitation that I see with blockchain, and which is why I think that there's still a place to go with it, is blockchain still a one-way technology. You have the information flowing from the farm up to the endpoint, but the historic problem in the agricultural sector has been the lack of information flow back to the farmer on what they should be producing, and in particular in terms of quality attributes or sustainability attributes. Blockchain doesn't help on that. So I think the systems that we need to be looking at are using blockchain as an enabler, but then turning around and figuring out how to connect that link back again, so you have basically a virtuous feedback loop. Whether it's sustainability audits, whether it's SMS on phones, but again, if you need actions on the behalf of that producer, that especially when you're thinking about different ESG targets, that could be valuable, but they need to know about it, and then they need to be paid for it.
Yeah, my take on this is that, like with any other technology, there's going to be that sort of initial boom hype period right at the beginning. And unfortunately, and I think this was the case in blockchain, and I think this is the case in some other technologies as well, like 3D printing and virtual reality, the boom in sort of hype and initial venture investment doesn't necessarily match up with when there are going to be really great consumer ready, consumable versions of that technology and of that product that are readily available. And so I think what we're seeing with blockchain was we've passed that initial sort of boom hype period. And now, 5 or so years later, we're starting to get into a period where those actual systems that will really provide value, but might seem more boring to the everyday person, are going to start becoming readily available and on the market. And I'm excited for that to happen in ag. I mentioned that with blockchain and also with 3D printing. 3D printing is one I feel the same way about. I'm starting to see really super cool applications for that, both in plant-based and cell-based, that I feel like are possible now, and they weren't when the hype first started, maybe 5 to 7 years back. So I'm excited to see both of those things happen in ag.
Talk more about that, because that sounds really interesting. And by the way, for our attendees, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. We'll see if we can take some questions here towards the end. But so 3D printing for food, what an interesting idea.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of it more in the cell-based space, and I am the total wrong person to ask if you would like a scientific explanation for how any of this stuff works. But as far as the applications that I've seen, a lot of our companies in cultivated meat are starting to use it, almost mini bioreactor setups to produce their products on a small scale but cheaply, which has been one of the big barriers to entry in the cultivated meat space so far. So that's one area where I've personally seen our startups starting to use it a lot. Obviously, a consumer future in which we could 3D print plant-based food right into our homes would be great as well. I can't honestly say I've seen that in action, but that would be a cool potential application for the future that I could see taking off if someone were to want to build that.
I got to believe that what's going on in food safety in China right now is affecting the market for alternative proteins, especially, it seems like ancient history, but the swine flu, of last year, what happened with the hog markets, the fact that demand, I don't think went down that much, even though the supply did. They just sourced it other places. Has that been a driver, or is that just wishful thinking on my part?
I definitely, oh, sorry, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say, Roger, I was in Shanghai the day that hundreds of dead pigs floated down a river and people were pulling them out and selling them to the stores. I mean, what is acceptable in some parts of the world is really quite amazing. And it's such a concern for consumer safety, right? And the lack of regulatory enforcement on some of these topics has been the big challenge in this part of the world. So it's not so much that we have the opportunities in order to execute food safety initiatives, it's the actual lack of regulatory enforcement or the lack of transparency around that regulatory enforcement that's been a challenge.
So to shift gears a little, sorry, any more on that topic?
The only thing I was going to say, and I think this is going off of a topic that was touched on earlier, but I really feel like COVID has done a good job, at least here in the US, of highlighting where those efficiencies are and where those dangers are, particularly in the system of animal agriculture that we have here. And we saw a lot of pork processing plants, one in South Dakota, one in Iowa, become just hotbeds for the spread of COVID amongst workers there. And that really got me, and I'm sure lots of other folks, thinking about this being such a ripe breeding ground for the next possible pandemic. So it's certainly been something that's drawn a lot of investor dollars and a lot of investor interest into the plant-based space in a way that I think wasn't there before COVID. So I guess there's a silver lining to everything.
Well, on that, I think all of you have mentioned food safety as another trend now, and maybe the trend is that consumers are just much more concerned about provenance and knowing where their food's from and that it's safe. And I think personally, I've been seeing a lot of technologies and companies building up around that increased demand. Have you seen that as well? Anybody? Well, if not, then I'll move along, because I had another topic I wanted to talk about. And this is for you, Mary. I know that you're an engineer by background, and you did some work with sustainable agrochemical products. Another trend that I've noticed is in soil health. In products, it's not so much digital. It's not bits and bytes, but it's actual. It's
Right.
fertilizer, herbicides, or
Right.
things that would replace them. Have you also seen some of that?
Well, I think there's a very interesting area out there right now in terms of, the microbial space has been very hot. I think it's very difficult to actually make breakthroughs in that because it's so hard to measure what the value is by those products. There's so many different ones. It's like a cocktail, though, a lot of interesting technologies out there. Again, the question is from a farmer standpoint is who's going to adopt. But some of these novel crop protection or even product protection approaches that come from a non-traditional way. I'm on the advisory board of a company called Crop Enhancement, and they are in the crop protection space. And the way they work is there's not an active ingredient. They actually coat the leaf of a plant while it's growing, and that coating protects the leaf from insects or from disease, and it actually doesn't kill, it just discourages. So, no insects have to die in this process unless, a moth lays an egg and that egg can't cut through and get the leaf underneath. So it's been substantially demonstrated in high value crops like, coffee and cacao. It's working on other high value crops like, strawberries, broccoli, things that are susceptible, but that doesn't coat the fruit itself. And then we have the class of products that actually coat the product. So like a peel, Cambridge crops now known as Mori, saving money in the value chain by reducing food waste, a hazel, which is a sachet rather than a thing. I mean, those to me, you have a very clear profit pool that you're going after from the standpoint of a tech developer. It's so much simpler when you can say, I know that this is what we can save. And I can take a part of that, and I know who saves it, so we can take a part of that. So those are some areas that I'm really excited about right now.
So Aiden, I don't know how much of that you caught or how much you missed. We were talking about blockchain. We talked about some soil additives and crop additives. We talked about alternative protein. We covered a lot of ground. So I want to give you a chance to jump in and tell us what you're seeing in the market as being kind of hot new technologies post-COVID.
Yeah, I think probably having missed the vital points, I'm sure that Abby and Lisa and Mary probably gave you much better ideas than I would anyway, so I'm going to give it my best shot. I think that the perspective I have is clearly shaped by the companies I'm meeting. I've met about 300 startups so far and invested in a fair number of those in the livestock space. The technologies arriving in livestock, there's definitely been an acceleration in the last 9 months. And some of that is related to COVID. Maybe the pipeline was coming anyway, and the amount of money being invested in them exceeds already what was invested in the entirety of the last year. In fact, we almost exceeded that number in the first 6 months. So there's a tremendous amount of deal flow and cash and money being invested in livestock technologies to make livestock more sustainable, to address welfare issues, and of course productivity as well. Everything is of interest. Abby mentioned 3D printers. I hadn't seen much movement in 3D printers. I see the 3D printers being used for equipment failure, obviously for printing food, as she mentioned, but also not least for parts of the world where it's just hard to get things, to fix things, to repair things. 3D printers really coming into play, but also even in the United States and Europe, where we've had greater difficulties in moving things around during COVID. Sensors, the ability to manage farms remotely, those are clearly tremendously interesting as well. And again, COVID has accelerated that. Cameras, business I've been involved in for the last year and a half, the ability to increase the transparency, but to allow veterinarians, to allow nutritionists, to allow management to engage with people on the farm remotely. That's those sorts of technologies. Blockchain, yes, maybe overhyped, maybe came too early, but certainly at the moment I see a lot more blockchain companies looking at increasing transparency within agriculture and being embraced to a degree perhaps that they weren't being embraced several years ago. So it feels as though augmented reality, virtual reality for training people without necessarily the need to go on farm, the need to engage directly with crops or with animals. All of these technologies appear to be being accelerated during this post-COVID or during COVID period to a degree that wasn't the case before, and clearly that's attracting investors as well.
How about valuations? You know, the PwC money tree said that valuations took a little dip and then kind of came back up a little. And that venture investment, while it's not as strong as it was last year, it's still strong. It's still money out there being spent. What's been your experience?
I agree with those comments, all of those comments. I think that the money definitely slowed down in the first 2-3 months of when we were shocked. Then you start thinking about what this new world looks like. And this new world looks like a world that's going to require more and more digital technologies, more and more ability to transparently see from the beginning to the end of the chain. So my suspicions, my expectations are that valuations will remain strong. I don't think we're going to see them increasing over where they were before, but certainly people can justify the multiples, justify the ways they've invested. The primary thing I'm seeing, however, Roger, is that people are investing in businesses that have got business. So they're less likely to invest in the hype. They're less likely to invest in technologies that are promising a future, much more likely to invest in things that have demonstrated the ability to generate revenue today, and the ability to generate profits on that revenue is even more exciting. So where I think we were in a cycle where we were investing very much in the promise, very much investing in the sizzle, now we're investing very much more in the sausage and demonstrating that the product is capable of delivering what it says it can deliver.
How about the rest of you? Would you agree with those comments, or what have you been seeing in terms of valuations and investment dollars?
Maybe I can talk. Asia and ASEAN in particular has been a huge focus, especially for impact investors in this part of the world, right? 70% of the world's food is produced by 70% of the world's poorest people and uses 70% of our available water. And so the opportunity to make an investment at this time in this part of the world in order to drive that change, irrespective of COVID or not, there's a huge amount of focus and effort on Southeast Asia as the impetus for that transformation. But in addition, the rest of the world has looked on ASEAN as a future of food, right? And future of food security. And so once again, this focus on digital transformation and transformation of the business model, the business process, anything that is really playing a role in that disruption has really seen a large amount of enhancement and focus here, and probably over valuations. I think you met AgriTech here at the panel. AgriTech are playing a big role in crop intelligence across Southeast Asia. I would say they're undervalued in contrast to the traditional American crop intelligence player. And why is that? And that is largely because in Asia, I think we're still trying to understand who is the payer, right? Is it the company who wants the transparency for supply chain agility? Is it the impact investors who are playing a role in influencing the companies to place a focus and an emphasis on sustainability or safety in supply chain? Or is it that smallhold farmer who's actually the payer? And I think those who have truly defined a sustainable business model where the payer is clearly demonstrating that willingness to pay are seeing the valuation performance. There is an expectation in this part of the world that they're going to get a discount just because it's COVID. And a lot of people have seen a valley of death that didn't exist before, especially on those pre-revenue companies, like you said, Aiden. But I think for the largest part, there's been a significant international focus on Southeast Asia, and that's playing a role here in pumping up those valuations.
Mary, is your experience similar?
I would say like Aiden, I think there's more interest now in companies that have revenue as opposed to the promises. I like what he said, that part of it. I think that's, companies that had a lot of hype continue to see a lot of money coming in. We see even things here like Indigo, where, seems to be some discipline coming into the marketplace now in terms of you can't just keep holding it out there in the future. You have to have a pathway to profitability, especially after multiple rounds.
Okay, well, with the last few minutes that we have, I wonder if each of you could maybe give me your view on what you think the future holds. If I'd asked you this a year ago, you all would have given me the wrong answer, no doubt. But what's 2021 going to look like for ag tech and investment in ag tech? Mary, let's stick with you since
Sure, I think it's going to continue to be really strong. I think as many of my, fellow panelists have said here, that COVID has really put a spotlight now, no matter where you are in the world, the fact that we might think we have a very sure food supply system, very secure system, but maybe it's not as secure as we thought it was. I do think, though, that, overall the system has responded very well. We had a lot of talk kind of in the middle here in the US about resilience and local food systems, but there weren't many days that you couldn't have things. I think the biggest impact, perhaps for all of us, is the fact that there's going to be so many more millions of people, hundreds of millions of people around the world that are food insecure. And, that brings up this really critical tension, which is we can do things in the system that make the system better. Sometimes those add cost from a sustainability standpoint, yet we have many, many, many people in the world, hundreds of millions of people that do not have the right nutritional profile. So how can we address that? So I hope for next year that there's more emphasis on the food as health space, and thinking about that, not just from a standpoint of, we want a world that is, environmentally, socially responsible, but nutritionally responsible as well. So that's my challenge. That's my hope. And I hope that we continue down that path.
Okay, Abby?
Absolutely agree with everything that Mary just said. I think, not only did COVID show us that we need to be thinking more critically about the way our food's produced, but it has also really got us thinking about who has access to food and who doesn't, and who has access to the right food options that are nutritious enough for you to be healthy enough with few enough pre-existing conditions to be able to survive a pandemic like this. I think that those inequalities, at least here in the US and certainly worldwide, have been really highlighted over the past few months. So if we're going to find a silver lining, I think that it's that. My biggest wish for 2021 is that regardless of how soon we get a vaccine, or regardless of how quickly we move into our recovery as a global food system, that we keep the lessons and we remember the lessons, and that we use that as a springboard to start building a more equitable system. And that's I'm going to have an optimistic view, and I'm going to say that we're going to make all of that happen in 2021.
Lisa?
Yeah, look, I think in this part of the world that increasing focus on climate change resilient technologies is going to be a big focus. Efforts around sustainable energy, around water scarcity and water solutions specifically in this part of the world are a big focus. And I genuinely believe that the increasing focus on seed and the quality of seed coming into region is going to be a concern and an area of opportunity. So they're the key areas where I see the change. I also see that, I teach masters versus robots at the university here, right? And we're talking about the complete digital transformation and automation of farming. And what I aspire is that is responsible farming, and that we're not just exacerbating the challenges that we have here, that we're rather finding those solutions in that digital transformation process.
Aiden, you get the last word on this.
Well, as usual, you made it hard for me because those are all great comments. Yeah, I think that the spotlight that's come on the food business, particularly over the last years, we have some tools that allow us to answer many of the questions consumers have. There is no question that we have sustainable challenges, the use of water, the effect on climate, the health of people. It's not sufficient just to give them nutrients anymore. We've spent the last 40, 50, 100 years making food cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. We have a whole lot of new challenges to face, and I'm very optimistic about technology. The one cry I would have out is, we've talked a lot about spending money. We talked a lot about what the technology could do. Many of the startups I meet need help. They need help probably from the people watching the show today. It's too easy to say why the technology won't work. It's too easy to be pessimistic. I'm very happy to see I'm on a panel of people that are optimistic, but they actually need practical help of introductions, of helping them find the cash, of finding the starter customers, to understand how to make the technology relevant to producers or farmers. So that would be my plea today. My question today is don't look at technology skeptically. It's too easy to do so. Help them be successful, because if they're successful, we as a planet are successful.
Got it. Okay, well, we went a little bit long, but it was good stuff. I could talk all day about this. I want to thank you, panel, for being here. Thanks for giving